There's nothing more profound, I don't think, than when a man can speak his truth and to share what's going on in his life and to do it and know that that is the most profoundly strong act he can take. And it's the most masculine act to share what he's experiencing. Because the only way someone can ever meet you in relationship is if you share what you're feeling, even if it's like, my hands are getting sweaty, I'm feeling a little bit anxious, like maybe you don't know the emotion, but if you give someone the chance to meet you, that's the only chance that they will have to show you a safe container.
Annie, what do you mean when you say all entrepreneurs live in some level of trauma?
Well, I got to tell you, what blew my mind is that almost every entrepreneur is addicted a little bit to chaos and addicted a little bit to solving problems, right? Most of us love solving problems. Well, as an entrepreneur, the reason why we like solving problems so much is we like that level of control. And that level of control is something we crave because usually between the age of 7 and 11, we have something that happens to us that takes away our control. And for the rest of our lives, we try to use the story that we come up with in that moment to create a better life for ourselves and to create more control. And so almost always an entrepreneur will have something crucial and critical that happened early on that will drive you into being an incredible high performer, an incredible problem solver, and someone who actually creates more chaos than you actually want to experience.
So they're creating more chaos out of this trauma. They get into it because they're seeking that control because there's been the loss of control
Correct.
in their life. But then the byproduct is creating more chaos.
Correct. It's a sort of a weird thing about the subconscious brain, right? The subconscious brain, its biggest fear is something that it's going to create over and over again because the subconscious runs 97% of our brain typically because it runs at 11 million data points a second versus the conscious brain that runs at only 40. So we all think we're running based off our conscious brain, but in essence, we're not. And so if we can look at that and be like, oh my gosh, the subconscious brain is really running me and driving me. That 7-year-old has more control than I do. It begins to make a little bit more sense. So I had somebody the other day where his biggest fear was that when he made over $2 million, he would die. And so every time he'd get close to making $2 million, he would get horribly sick, end up in the hospital. Once we identified this pattern, we were able to rewire it in his head. And it all went back to when his dad died. His dad had only made that amount of money his whole life. So when his dad died, that was the amount that was stuck in his head is all he would ever make. So once we rewired that, he went out and he took his company to IPO status because all of a sudden there was no ceiling anymore on what he could create. But up until then, he created a lot of chaos, making himself sick even, taking himself into the hospital over and over again every time he tried to break through that revenue barrier.
That's wild. Like to even think, I mean, obviously our minds are so powerful and we create these narratives and stories and everybody's got something that if you tell another person, they look at you like you're speaking a different language. To have a thought that though, if I make a certain amount of money, it's going to lead to death. Like that is something that is obviously wired in trauma. With these entrepreneurs, there's something that happened in their early life. We all had that. We all have something that traumatized us from a young age. What is it that's different though about the entrepreneur that's able to take that and use it to, in essence, create success, right? Because I mean, making $1.5 million, $2 million, there's still some success. And I love that's about your work is like you tap into an area where most people don't think is struggling with trauma. Like when you think of somebody that's traumatized, like they're shackled, they're unable to break through and create these barriers of success. So what is it about the entrepreneurs that enable them to take that trauma and turn it into good, maybe not great that they could be, that's why they need you, but they're able to have that level of success where some people, same event, keeps them shackled from doing anything.
So as entrepreneurs, right, we never like to think that anything is shackling us or limiting us, right? Because for all of us, if I were to say the word trauma to an entrepreneur, he's going to look at me and think I'm crazy, right? Every entrepreneur I've ever worked with is like, I don't really think I have that much trauma, right? Now, here's the difference. As an entrepreneur, when you do have trauma, what happens is a couple of things. The first thing is you try to use negative fuel to drive you forward. So it's always about trying to prove yourself to other people, trying to disprove people in your life that told you you couldn't do something. And what usually is tied to that is the repression of your emotions. And so when you don't have emotions to manage and you have this negative fuel, you can drive towards a lot of results. But what happens is you'll drive towards results until you hit your particular ceiling. And that ceiling will either be revenue that you can't create, a relationship that destroys you, relationships with your kids that don't work the way they should. And you realize all of a sudden, I've been building so much success and I've built all this revenue, but my relationships aren't working and I'm not even fulfilled at what I'm doing. And that's because you've run out of that negative fuel that typically would drive you. And your repressed emotions are now right under the surface, and they're causing a lot of emotional management issues, if that makes sense.
100%. And I know that this question would almost be impossible to maybe quantify the answer, because you would almost need like an alternate reality where the person's living two different lives at the same time. But how much of the success of the entrepreneur is predicated on that initial trauma? Or if they hadn't experienced that, could they still have gone on to create the same level of success?
Well, I think that with every level of trauma that somebody experiences, you create a superpower. And this superpower allows you to drive forward into success until you reach a certain level. So all entrepreneurs have different levels of success that are based, I believe, on their trauma pattern and how long they're willing to live within that pattern. Because eventually the pattern breaks and they're like, gosh, I keep doing the same thing and it's not getting me any further. So I think for a lot of people, there's a level of success that you will attain from your trauma pattern, but it's because in that trauma pattern, you create a superpower that few people around you have. And the biggest fear of most entrepreneurs is, if I address this trauma or this old programming, will it take away my edge? Will it take away the thing that made me so successful? And it's actually the exact opposite. What it does is when you work on your trauma patterning and you identify it and you get yourself out of it much faster, you become even more productive. It's like you win back hours of your day because your brain isn't throwing you off or disorienting you or distracting you from the opportunities that do exist.
Does it require them to be at a certain level of success though, right? You know, if something traumatizes you, example with your client. So he was young, I'm sure, when his
He was
father.
15. Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, not super young, aware, you know, right?
Yep.
But 15. And he's how old now, where you've kind of been able to unpack? So he's in his 40s, so 30 plus years. Had you come into his life in his 20s, would he still been able to harness and develop that same level of superpower? Or does this require you to go through a certain journey with the trauma to then get on the other side to be able to extract the lesson out of it?
So I would say for almost everyone I've seen, right, usually until they hit 40, they don't really do this deep work. Right. So it's just been my experience that when people hit their 40s, all of a sudden they become more aware and more awake. And therefore, we end up doing super deep work. Now, I think everybody has their own journey. And so while some people might have had something happen to them when they're 15 or when they're 11 or when they're 7, it always reaches a point where the program breaks and it doesn't give them the same benefit anymore. And so that's where the work has to be done. Now, what's interesting to me is I've been doing it in a little bit of a backwards way. I've been helping people that are trying to break through, say, 500 grand to get to the next level of their business, because I also I like helping people make a ton of money. I also like helping people who are trying to break through that 500 grand level for their business. And we're identifying what pattern has held them back their whole life then, so that their business becomes a calling. Instead of just something they're doing to make money, it changes the direction and the trajectory of the business early on. Now, I wish more entrepreneurs would do that work early on, but I think many of us get stuck in a very scarcity mindset, and we believe we have to produce more and create more. We have to hustle more. It's just that I think there's a whole group of entrepreneurs now that are like, we want to be aware of what we're doing to ourselves so that we don't do it in business. Because again, if you're doing it to yourself in business, the people you're attracting to be part of your team that are your quote unquote leaders are likely going to have the same level of traumatic experience that you've had. Which means everyone's got the same pattern, which is limiting how quickly your company can scale and grow.
I remember early on when I was on my kind of healing and recovery journey, I was diving deep into these masculinity books, Iron John, stuff like that. And I think it was Iron John by Robert Bly, where he talks about men go on these 12-year cycles. Like every 12 years, we recreate ourselves. I mean, you think of a boy from 12 to 13, he literally becomes a teenager, right? For the longest time, this was the age of initiation. Then around 23, 24, 25, it's kind of you break out of your parents, right? Maybe you graduate from school kind of in the modern society. Now you're stepping into a career field. Now you're stepping into kind of living on your own. Then you reach 36, 37, maybe 35, or maybe 40. And it's like, now you got some life behind you. You have some experience. You've tasted the real world. You've been slapped around a little bit. And now you got to kind of start to go in. And that's how Robert kind of described it. So it's interesting that your response was like, it's around 40 when the entrepreneurs, because we've just maybe ball busted through it, right? We've kind of just used grit, tenacity, testosterone, hustle, right? I can get you to $1 million, get you to $2 million. And then you reach that glass ceiling. So it's really interesting there how there's all these kind of parallels. Now you mentioned with these lower level, and I don't want to call them lower level, but the 500K entrepreneurs, like healing them first so that they're attracting the right type of people onto their team.
And they're making the right decisions because they're more calm than they've ever been. They're not letting that trauma pattern run them subconsciously.
Let's go there in terms of relationships, attraction. It can be personal relationships, but business relationships, since we're kind of speaking more to the entrepreneurships as well. What role is our trauma playing, and how does that impact the people that we bring into our life? I mean, if you're hiring, you think you're looking at a resume, right? So this person's qualified, boom, boom, boom. What does my past have to do with how I'm going to interview and read somebody's resume?
Well, this is the crazy part, right? And I've seen this so often now that I just know it is accurate. When you are living in a world where 97% of your brain is running a story, right? You're going to feel more comfortable with somebody else that you're interviewing who's running a similar story. And so you might not know why you feel that affinity for the person, or why you feel like they get you or you get them, or it just might be a good fit for the culture. But your story is directing what you attract. And if you've ever read the book, Getting the Love You Want, it's really interesting to watch how your trauma pattern will attract your personal relationship, that spouse or that significant other with a similar trauma pattern, because you're here to heal each other, right? So similar things happen in business. It's just you end up, like, for example, in the first team I ever created, my ex-husband and I had a lot of trauma, from his trauma, from my trauma. And we were shocked, and I don't mean this badly about our team, but we had a team of 20 different instructors, and they were all former military guys who are awesome people, but we all had similar issues with, like, we couldn't live in our hearts. We always had these like blockages around like giving to people, and so we end up with a team that was producing a set amount every year, but all of us, we couldn't share our feelings. We couldn't really get connected. We couldn't be vulnerable with each other. And then it was funny, we did a bunch of work in between that business and the future ones, and all of a sudden we're attracting multi-millionaires to work with us because we did the work on ourselves, and those trauma patterns are no longer attracting that same level of individual, which was crazy to us. But when you watch it happen over and over again, you're like, there is a vibrational component to who you attract.
Yeah. And I spent enough time around you and Larry and in these circles, and been on this journey myself, that I think I know the answer to this question. But I think some people here and there, it's like, I know we're running businesses, it's spreadsheets, it's data points, it's numbers. The more we remove our heart from it, the better that we're going to be able to scale and succeed. So what role does being vulnerable and being in your heart have to do with succeeding in business?
So I would tell you that being in your heart is almost the biggest key to figuring out what your calling is, and also to attracting the people that you want into your business. It's so wild. Like, I just worked with a man, he makes millions and millions of dollars. He's in real estate and in private equity. And he had been working on his heart, like through Joe Dispenza, lots of heart resonance work. And for the first time ever, through an experience that I took him through, he was able to be in his heart and live there for longer than like a 5-minute blip. And all of a sudden, he's got new partnerships evolving. He's got new people coming into his life. He's like, I thought I was set. I never have to make any more money. But now I'm opening up to a whole new experience of wanting to give back in a totally different way. So I think that the heart and having access to the heart, especially for a man, right? The journey from the head to the heart is the best journey a man can go on, because it opens up your ability to attract and magnetize to you. So I think when most people think in business, the heart is not that important, spreadsheets, metrics, numbers, it's because they haven't really spent the time focusing on the culture of their company. Because the culture, if there's connection, if there's the ability to give and receive feedback in a positive way, if there's delegation from a place of connection, everybody wins and everyone feels wanted and desired and needed, and it takes the culture to a completely different level. So for the people listening that might be like, no, I don't need to have emotions, I don't need to be connected to my heart, you will cap yourself at a certain level of success and performance, and you will always wonder, could I have gone farther and done more to impact others and stepped truly into my calling if I'd opened up my heart more? And I'm telling you, yes.
The journey from your head to your heart is the most important journey that a man can go on.
So what it means is, if you want to be in an epic relationship, if you want to be in an epic business that's abundant and overflowing, we have to learn to get out of our head and to get into the feeling of connection, which there's actually a formula for. This is something my ex and I came up with when we were working with all these companies all over the country. The connection formula is authenticity plus vulnerability plus trust. So if you want to create connection in every aspect of your life, you have to be as authentic as possible. You have to be as vulnerable as you're willing to be, and you have to trust that the people you're doing that with will hold you in a safe space. Now imagine if everybody did that with every interaction, it would change the dynamic of business. And the people that are extremely successful typically have incredible cultures, and they are more connected to their hearts. They're more connected to the impact because they're sharing so vulnerably with each other. And performance goes very high in those situations.
What does authenticity mean?
So I think authenticity, the easiest way I can describe it is that you have to be congruent with what you say and what you do. So if, say, I was a coach and I was, for example, when I was going through my divorce, I felt like it would be not congruent for me to coach couples because I'm going through one of the hardest experiences couples would ever had. So I stepped way back from coaching couples, and I basically told all my couples that I was coaching, we got to take a pause. But when I came back and I had learned so much about relationships, and I'd helped so many people in that divorce process, I was like, all right, now I'm congruent with who I am. I am representing like my love of people being in beautiful, connected partnership, marriage, if that's what they want. But now I can be congruent and live that way because my words and my actions and my beliefs are all in alignment. So that's what authenticity means to me, that I'm the same way I am with you as I would be with a young child, as I would be with a multi-million-dollar celebrity. I don't change. I'm exactly the same. No matter how you interact with me, I'm always going to treat you with kindness and love and respect.
So important. Truth, radical truth and honesty, not just in the areas that you believe it needs to be important, but with yourself, with the conversation that you're having. When you look yourself in the mirror, where are you not living in authenticity? That's one of the biggest things that we drive in our program. You know, the work that we do with men struggling with pornography. It's like you feel disconnected because you're showing up in your relationship as a different person than you are when you're by yourself. Once we can rip that apart, and it starts with honesty, though, it starts with truth. So authenticity plus vulnerability. What does vulnerability mean?
So for me, vulnerability means being willing to share the emotional feelings that you're not quite sure what they are yet. Because I think for men, right, we, at least from what I've experienced, you have all these feelings that come up, but we're not really sure how to speak them sometimes. And what I've learned for men when they're working with women and they're in a relationship, when the woman gets extremely emotional and she's got all this stuff that she's sort of, spewing or talking through, if a man can just identify what emotion she's feeling and just say, I can see that you're upset. I can see that you're sad. I can see that you're struggling right now. That allows the man to then connect with his emotional state as well from the past. And it's a very healing thing because most men, it's very hard to identify an emotion. I've even had like the emotion wheel with a lot of my clients and been like, well, what are you feeling on this wheel? And they're like, I don't even know. And I'm like, well, good. Let's look at the wheel. Right. So I think that what you said about truth is so key. And I ask the question all the time of my clients, what do you want to be true in this moment? Because when we're in story or we're in that phase around thinking that something might be true of us, but we get caught in the subconscious, we have to interrupt that pattern by asking ourselves, if this is the story, what do we actually want to be true? Do we want the story to be true, or do we want something else to be our reality? And that immediately interrupts the story typically.
Yeah. I feel like everybody listening has had this happen where they've asked a man, maybe it's their father, maybe a great friend, maybe it's been themselves. Hey, how you doing? Fine. And you almost immediately know that the words do not match what he's ultimately feeling. That guy is he's not able to be vulnerable in that moment. He probably doesn't know how to describe what it is he's feeling. And I think what I heard you say is like the vulnerability is like the willingness to process what's going on inside of me in real time with another person.
Yes.
So I don't know what this emotion is, but this is how it's making me feel. I got a pit in my stomach here. I got sweaty palms. I'm a little nervous right now. I'm thinking about 97 different things, about the future and the past. I don't know what that emotion is, but that's what I'm experiencing. And I'm not saying that's what I'm experiencing right now, but that would be like being vulnerable in a situation as opposed to saying, how you feeling, babe? I'm fine. How are you? Type of thing, which is oftentimes like the immediate response.
Well, it's the default response, right? Because we're not sure. Like even my ex, right? We spent a lot of time being like, what are you feeling? And I remember one time he called me, he's like, Annie, I'm feeling anxious, but I'm also feeling like sort of happy anxious. He's like, do you know what that is? I'm like, it's, you feel excited. And he was, that is the word. He's like, that is what I'm talking about. But like, it really takes some time to process it. Even for us as women, sometimes we're in the feeling before we know what we're feeling. So I'm just thankful there are so many men out there that are working on their vulnerability and they're working on being more authentic with who they are. Because if you can be authentic with the person you're in relationship with, there's so much beauty there and there's so much healing. And all a woman truly wants from the man is for him to share what he's feeling anyway, so that she can be there with him in it. because then there's that connection place that they can find together.
Yeah. And I think the third piece here, the trust, is what's going to lead to the ability to be ultimately vulnerable. Because I think a lot of guys struggle with maybe opening up and being vulnerable because maybe there's not that trust there. Maybe they haven't been walking in authenticity, but there's also this, maybe the media has done this. Maybe it's been what's been taught to men. Maybe it's been our grandfather's kind of generation. It's like, if you talk about your emotions, you're not a masculine man. So it's like, how do I express authenticity while holding on to my masculinity? Is that where the trust now is going to kind of come into play?
I think it is. I mean, I think men also need a very safe and loving container for them to express, allow themselves to really feel the response from the woman. Because from my perspective, some of those masculine men that I've ever dated or known, they were the ones that could hold that beautiful bridge between the masculinity and their vulnerability. And there's nothing more profound, I don't think, than when a man can speak his truth and to share what's going on in his life, and to do it and know that that is the most profoundly strong act he can take. And it's the most masculine act to share what he's experiencing. Because the only way someone can ever meet you in relationship is if you share what you're feeling, even if it's like, my hands are getting sweaty, I'm feeling a little bit anxious, like maybe you don't know the emotion, but if you give someone the chance to meet you, that's the only chance that they will have to show you a safe container.
Yeah. When I heard you say safe container, like I immediately went to peace. Like, is the woman in the relationship providing peace for the man to be able to be vulnerable? And I don't know, I'm not the expert in what that is in her, but it's like, I've been there and I've been in the opposite ones as well, where it's like, it's not peaceful. And it's like, no, I'm not going to share these things because it's just going to blow it up and become a whole different issue.
It's really hard, I think, too, because like so many times, and I'm not saying women are the only problem, because I think women and men both have issues, right? Sometimes, but I think that we as women become so masculine sometimes that when we go to our men or the men that we're in relationship with, and we try to pull things out of them, we're doing it from a very masculine place instead of from a very feminine, loving, nurturing place. Because I think when men have that beautiful feminine energy, it moves them. But many of us as women have never been taught, like, well, how do I step into feminine? Because we're so heavy in the workforce, being independent, making our own lives, making our own money. And it's really difficult sometimes to navigate that. So it ends up being masculine upon masculine, fighting it out, creating a lot of conflict when that's not what anybody really wants in connection.
Now, is this journey from the head to the heart, is that oftentimes guys are kind of on the same timeline and journey as they are with healing the trauma? Is this something that like happens later? I don't want to say later on in life because it makes me feel like I'm old because I'm 41 now, but it's like, is this something you kind of got to go through some bumps and bruises to experience this? Or because we got half of the audience that's going to be in their 20s that are hearing this, like, are these things that younger men should be working on and understanding and developing within themselves? Or is this kind of running coincide with like the 40 healing trauma of the inner work?
Well, I would tell you that a lot more of the younger men are doing this work now, and it's giving them a huge advantage over, quote unquote, the competition, right? Other men. And so, while I see it predominantly happening with me through my clients from age 35 until probably 45, that's that window of all this deep work they're doing. And sometimes it's because they've had young families, and the young families have forced them to really address certain things in themselves. But I got to say, like, if young men between the age of 20 and 30 are willing to do this work on themselves, you're going to attract partners that are of the same value that you have. Your vibration energetically is going to improve. You're going to be able to attract and magnetize more wealth to you earlier on, because there's a frequency of, I know this sounds strange, but like I read this book once called It's Not Your Money. And it's all about how the frequency of love can match wealth, can match money, can match energy. And if you can look at all money that is generated as something that comes from a loving place and from that level of energetic vibration, then you can attract so much more of everything you want into your life. So I think these 20-year-old guys who have a chance to do this journey early, they're going to fly past most of us in the impact they create in the world.
I don't want to ask this question as if like a guy can end up here by accident, right? But are there men that maybe because they were brought up and raised in the right type of environment, just by default live in their heart? Or is this something that every guy has to be super intentional, whether it's your work or somebody else's work, about saying, okay, I've been living in my head. How do I move this on a heart? You understand like the question, like, is there a way for a young man to grow up and develop himself into becoming the man that lives truly in his heart?
Well, I think that there are so many different things that can happen to a young man to cause him to go more into his head or more into his heart. I think there's always this like road that's being diverged and twisted here or there. Because I think everybody starts with the ability for full capacity to use their heart, but over experiences and, relationships that shut a man's heart down or causes him to put up these boundaries or these walls, it's really a fight to get back to that open-heartedness that you have when you're just a little kid, right? Like if you look at any little boy who's running around, especially if he has a mom, like all they want to do is love on their mom and have snuggles and touch and all that good stuff. And then over time, that changes because they're either taught, that's not acceptable, that's not allowed, we don't hug everybody, whatever those stories are. And then they create a persona or an identity around these false stories, right? But every single man is born, I think, with a completely open, beautiful heart. And it's just the experiences over time that cause that heart to change or to shift. And, I've been recently meeting so many men who have done such incredible work on themselves, and they are connected and they're brilliant geniuses in business, but they care so much about everybody around them that the energy of the business is building so much momentum and bringing in so much money, and everyone's winning because of it.
I love that. Yeah. You described like the mama's boy, like I know there's probably a lot of men that heard that. And it's like, yeah, I remember being like, 6, 7 years old. And it's like wanting to go everywhere. Like I want to go to the grocery store with my mom just so like I could be the one that carried in the groceries. It's like, I felt kind of empowered of doing that. And it's like, yeah. And then the world kind of slaps you around. You get a heartbreak. You're like, I don't trust women anymore. And then you get into the business and it's like, yeah.
Everything is shutting men down like over time, right? They're like everything from relationships to being like grinding in business, not getting enough sleep. I mean, everything shuts, men and women down. And I think honestly, we all start with this very open heart. And then over time, the trauma sort of takes us off our path. And that's our job to find our way back to that open heart and to choose ourselves over time.
Yeah. It's almost like we're on a hero's journey within ourselves.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
And every man's hero's journey is different, right? So like you can't compare your journey to anybody else's. You are here for a reason and a higher calling. And whatever your journey is fine. We can't judge the journey. All we can do is be like, listen, don't compare yourself to anybody else. Any young man or man who's listening, stop comparing yourself to anybody else around you. This is your journey. It is your time to step up and go through whatever the experience is that you have signed up for to take you to the next level. And there's no judgment. We're just learning or we're winning.
Circling back to the beginning, the question that we opened up with, that all entrepreneurs live at some level. I think, and that's directly from your website. I'm sure you knew that, but for the audience, I pulled that quote directly from the top line on his website, which we'll link down there below. What stood out to me there is some level of trauma. So what are these different levels that we can be living from?
So, I mean, so many different possibilities. Like I'll give some examples to make it real, right? So I had one gentleman who thought he had no trauma whatsoever, but he had never been in a deeply connected relationship with someone. And so I was like, well, that's intriguing. I wonder where that comes from. Turns out his mom put him on an airplane when he was a young kid and sent him to live with his dad in America. And because he was put on that airplane, he literally thought that everyone around him had died. He created the story that everyone around him had died. And so as a little kid, your brain makes up weird stuff. So as he grew and he became this entrepreneur and he did amazing things in business, he never was able to plan because planning meant there would be a future. And so since this little kid had told himself a story that everyone had died, there was no future. And so why would you plan? So when I met him and we identified this, I was like, oh my God, what if we started teaching you how to plan? You started planning regularly. Do you think your business would grow? And so he started planning regularly. He had never done this before with his wife, never done this before in his business. His business took off like crazy. But it was because he wasn't able to plan that he got stuck and limited at the amount of money he was making and the relationship with his wife. So it's just wild to watch how that's one level of, I guess, trauma pattern. There was another level of trauma pattern where a gentleman he literally, unless he is connected, unless he feels fueled by connection, he can't create in business. So I would say we can't really judge any of the levels. Everybody just has a different level because we're all looking at, well, do we try to isolate ourselves from source or like God? Do we try to isolate ourselves from other people? Or do we try to isolate ourselves from the goodness that is within us? It always falls into those three buckets, and there are a ton of layers underneath.
Okay. So there wasn't I was thinking there's this chart, there's a spectrum, you're level 1 over here. It has, 3 degrees of this and the color is yellow, and then you move here and then it's orange, and then at the height and level 9 is like a red, and this is paralyzing you, and it's you don't even move. So I guess my interpretation of that was a little bit off.
I would say, Frank, that there is literally, and I know this is probably a little too scientific, but if your nervous system is in fight or flight, which many people do have that's a deeper level of trauma patterning. right? So like everyone has trauma, whether it's big trauma or little trauma, that doesn't matter. But if your nervous system is controlled by the trauma, which many people are, and you're in fight or flight, then that's like almost like a heavier level of trauma to work through.
Yeah, it's definitely not too science there. With that, then I guess like that's an interesting thing to maybe kind of explore a little bit. We've done a lot of conversations in 2024, understanding the nervous system and the healing component that's necessary, in my opinion, of that nervous system to ultimately create a new identity. That's our kind of journey as we walk guys through. It's like, if you have something stored in your nervous system that it triggers and it's always going to take you back there, and you may be able to articulate this a little bit better than me. So how can one maybe even know or understand if they're storing trauma? Because I think this would maybe be like in the book, Your Body Keeps the Score, right? I think that's Dr. Daniel Amen. So how would we know? Like, I mean, I know, but maybe speak to like, okay, the audience out there recognizing, hey, this is like deeper than just your thought patterns. Like this is in you.
So the things that I've seen with people who are in fight or flight in their nervous system, right, which means they can't really self-regulate their reaction to things. So typically they're more reactive, right? And it could be just something small sets them off. It could be you get to the end of the day, you sit on the edge of your bed and you wish you could do nothing but rest, but your brain won't turn off. And so you can't. It might be you get into bed and your brain runs and you still can't fall asleep. It might be you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't turn your brain off. It might be that you are, like I've seen it for a lot of women, they get stuck in their to-do list. And so unless their to-do list is done, they can't calm. It could also be something as simple as you don't like being in really loud environments or around a lot of people, right? So there's just a lot of things that can come up, but I've found that reactivity and going into an emotional shutdown, those are pretty clear indicators, right? If you can't rest and lie down and just have a moment to be internal, then usually your nervous system is a little bit amped. And that can happen from so many different things. I mean, it can be literally having had a lot of drugs in your past, having had a lot of caffeine. I've seen everything like caffeine really impacts your nervous system. Alcohol impacts your nervous system. Drugs impact your nervous system. You know, there's just a lot of things that can cause you to amp unnecessarily in certain situations.
What, if any, role is the gut playing in this that you understand?
Yeah, the gut plays a huge role because the gut is directly responsible for the neurochemistry of the brain. And so if you think about it, when your gut produces healthy bacteria, that healthy bacteria is going to tell your brain to produce more serotonin, more oxytocin, more of those feel-good chemicals. But most of us are born without a high percentage of like really healthy gut bacteria, especially if we don't come through the birth canal, right? So what I've noticed is that if you really want to turn on the bacteria power of your body, which runs your entire body, it's really helpful to look at, well, how can I make my gut more healthy? I've done a lot of research on it for quite a few years. And the best thing that I've ever found is this really tiny company out of Boston that is called Biome Tech. And they look like nothing. Their website doesn't make a lot of sense, but if you go and you look and you get their sprays, I have entrepreneurs who have gotten these sprays and they literally are saving themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars and innovating in new ways and making different decisions because finally they're calm.
Yeah, Vince has talked a lot about that in his journey, getting off caffeine and what he's been on. I know he's been very instrumental in what he's been going through. This is something I almost kind of stumbled into, right? So I, at the beginning of, overcoming pornography addiction, like I began to fast for the first time. I left the world of bodybuilding, which it was like, you will never see a bodybuilder fasting. Like we don't go more than 2 hours without putting food in our body. It's like we're going to shrivel up and lose all of our muscle, which now we understand is false, but you buy into that belief system, right? It kind of shapes how you live. And in late 2018, 2019, like I started exploring short-term, I say short-term, 2 to 3 days at a time. So they were longer than just intermittent fasting, but it was quickly changing literally the way that I was like, not just feeling, but like thinking and almost seeing the world. Like it literally changed my perception, my worldview. And then at the beginning of 2019, I fell into the carnivore diet craze. Like I was researching some things for autoimmune that I was in a relationship with, came across Jordan Peterson's work. I saw the healing benefits. I said, I'm going to go 60 days, meat only. Went on a 60-day meat only diet. Once again, began to feel incredibly different. Like everything about me felt lighter, felt more energetic. I got off caffeine. It was like, and then looked deeper into it. It was like, okay, like I removed all the processed junk. I removed all the garbage from my system. I allowed my gut microbiome to fully reset. And I didn't use things like Biome Tech, but I healed a lot of my gut microbiome. And then I brought it into the curriculum for the guys that we were working with, just because it worked for me. Like I didn't know anything about the healing process, the role that the gut plays and the neurotransmitters, like all that stuff came later on for me. The guys were saying, what did you do? Coach us in that same way. And I said, well, I ate only meat and I fasted a lot. So, and then all these guys were feeling more energetic, the mental clarity. They're like, I just feel more at calm. And I'm like, well, you got all corn. And then I got to understand, no, you're actually producing healthier neurotransmitters.
It's amazing. Well, I just want to say you are incredible for walking the men through that process, because it is a process. Like, it took a while for you to dial that in, right? And I feel like so many people are looking for like a quicker fix, but like it all takes time, right? You always have to put in the energy and you have to put in the effort to see the change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Calling. You talked about calling, moving from a career to calling, or when your business, you find that peace when your business finally becomes your calling. When you use that word, is that kind of synonymous with life's purpose? And this is a big question. I don't want to, overcomplicate it, but how does one even begin to maybe kind of explore finding like their calling in life?
So what I tend to do, and this is just what I've learned, right? I could be wrong, but what I tend to do with people is when I can tell when someone doesn't have access to their purpose, right? Because they're going through the motions of life, but they're not feeling really like alive by any of it. And so what I notice is if you can identify the main trauma pattern that the person is in, and you show them what that pattern is and what it does to them, and then you can dive into what is the main thing that your subconscious doesn't want you to know about this pattern, you can help identify the purpose from there. And so I fully believe that identifying, working through the trauma pattern allows you to get to your purpose much faster, because you could spend 40, 50 years trying to find your purpose in this world. Or you can do the work, identify what is the pattern and what is the purpose for you that makes you feel alive, that comes off of understanding that pattern. So I have sort of a quick process I walk people through, because I want to take them from not feeling purpose to feeling so on purpose, and then taking that purpose into their companies and into their families, because it just changes the game, because it changes the filter of your subconscious brain.
And I think some people are afraid, especially if they've had success, right? If they've had success maybe in this particular business sector, right? Maybe it's been finance, and they didn't feel that finance was the calling, but dad was in banking, uncles were financiers. They were told from a very young age, your path to financial freedom, like you need to be on this journey of getting into Wall Street. But I think what you were saying is like a guy can start a business, be a founder, have success, not feel like it's his calling, and then stay in that same industry and have it unlock a calling.
So what I've found is that usually what happens is you get into a career, right? You do well at it, you do well enough, you create some success. Then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, I don't really feel fulfilled by this. I don't feel like this is my full potential. I feel like there's more for me. I just don't know what it is. Usually at that point of time, you go on this like journey of awakening, your hero's journey, right? You're like, well, I'm going to do a couple of therapy sessions, or I'm going to go find a healer. I'm going to go just do a psychedelic, or whatever it is they do, right? All I'm saying is that when you're on that hero's journey of awareness of self, that's usually when all these really incredible openings happen. And that's usually then how you discover your purpose. It's not from your first career, even sometimes your second career. It usually is when you start asking yourself the question of, is there more for me? Do I have more potential? Is there something more I can give to the world, or a greater way I can impact? It's when you feel like you're not quite where you want to be, that this greater mission and calling for you can open up.
Got it. Yeah, no, definitely resonate there. North Star leadership. That's your coaching. I'm curious, like North Star, like, is that having like a clear and definite aim? Like, is that kind of what you're speaking to there? And what role does having a clearly defined aim, goal, target, North Star play in healing trauma?
So this is the funny part. So we used to work with a lot of the Navy SEAL guys, right? And I was fascinated by how their brains worked for accomplishing impossible missions. I was like, well, if we can figure out what this is, then we can bring it to all the normal people that need this kind of information, right? So I heard that these Navy SEAL guys were planning these impossible missions using an emotion. Like, that was how they started to create these missions. You would think like, no, it's tactical, it's strategic. No, they would start with, what is the emotional state that we want to create at the end of the mission? Then they would backwards engineer from that emotional state. So when I saw that, I was like, well, what if we create your emotional state first, and it becomes your North Star, and then it becomes the filter for all of your subconscious and conscious thought? Because then you will always be driving towards something and have a very clear filter for it. And that's how you find your purpose, your calling, and why you're here. So I worked to backwards engineer how the Navy SEALs plan the most impossible missions. And I use that tool and that process to help people connect deeply with their purpose And their North Star is, in essence, the filter for the new purpose. And that's how we work to rewire some subconscious brain patterns.
Yeah. So it starts with creating the emotions that you want to feel.
Correct. Because emotions move you. Like, you can have a goal and be like, oh, I want to floss my teeth 15 times, between now and Sunday. But if you don't feel emotionally connected to that goal, you're very unlikely to accomplish it. And for most of us, we've been conditioned our whole lives that we set a goal, we achieve it. We set a goal, we achieve it. We set a goal, we achieve it. And after a while, setting a goal means nothing to us, and achieving it doesn't even give us like a dopamine boost at all. And then we're like, well, now we have no fulfillment. What have we been doing with our lives? So instead, if you look at success as that feeling and you focus on, how do I create more of this feeling that I love every day? You actually will create more of your ideal day now instead of waiting for it 40 years from now.
I love it. Relationships. We touched on it a little bit in the attraction piece there at the beginning, but one of the things you talked to me about before we hit record is a lot of the new work that you've been doing in working and servicing either couples that are in business together or working together. What are kind of some of the findings that you're seeing?
Well, it's either couples that are working together in business. The people that find me are usually in the real estate space or in the tech space. And it's usually because they have two super powerful personalities and they're looking for ways that they can connect more deeply because they're working with each other all the time. So what I found from that is, ironically and thankfully, like the past working with my ex-husband for 15 years together and trying to figure out how do we build connection when, we're both very different people, we have very different goals, and we like to do very different things. And so that's sort of how entrepreneurial couples work. And so I've been doing a lot to help them use different techniques like giving and receiving really good feedback for each other that is connecting. Because as you know, right, couples don't like to give each other feedback, or they usually get a little defensive when it happens.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've seen a lot of couples that are in business or working together with is having that line drawn where it's not business 24/7, right? Where date nights don't turn into strategy sessions, or, couch time doesn't turn into, spreadsheet analyzing. Like, how do people navigate that part of the relationship? Or is it just kind of comes with like, this is going to kind of be what you do?
It depends on the couple. I think a lot of couples have been asking me recently, they're like, can you help us build more intimacy? Can you help us really section off our day a little bit better so that we close work by 6 and we have time as a family, and then we have time for ourselves to be intimate? And intimacy doesn't have to mean sexual intimacy. It can be emotional or physical or, spiritual even, right? But there's been a request for, how do we build more intimacy instead of racing to the goal, right? Like, it's the thing that we're doing in business, we're racing to goals. And then when we get to the goal, we don't feel as much. A lot of couples, and I apologize if I'm a little out there with this, but a lot of couples are racing to the orgasm. And they're not realizing that every touch can be an orgasm when you're with the person and you're in that really synced up, connected, intimate space. So it's about slowing down and helping them have more intimacy in the look, the emotion, the spiritual connection. So that's been a little what I've been doing with Salute.
No, I love that. I have a great friend, Tony DiLorenzo, has been on the show now twice. Him and his wife run One Extraordinary Marriage, massive podcast, 14 years movement. They created 6 pillars of intimacy. It's kind of their framework.
I've read that book. That
they teach.
Yep.
Yeah. Amazing. Right. And you touched on a lot there, financial intimacy,
Yes.
recreational intimacy. Like, are you playing and having fun together?
Just one they missed. Inclusion intimacy. Like, if you're apart from each other, if you're not sending like, here's what I'm doing. Oh my gosh, here's what I'm doing. That inclusion piece, it's so important for people to feel like you've included your spouse or your significant other in your life. But all of their pillars were incredible. I just thought, like, for me, that would be an additional one that I would add in.
Yeah. The one thing that Tony really, like, we started that conversation up with was really reframing how people even look. And you touched on it, right? So many people are racing towards the sexual intimacy or racing towards the orgasm. It's like, no, if you actually focus on the other 5, if you focus on emotional connection, spiritual connection, and recreational connection,
financial connection,
the sex is like, it's just going to take care of itself.
Always
put all your effort in this. Like, and if you have 5 pillars that are thriving, the 6th is going to be
it's going to be off the chart. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah. But we live in a pornographic culture, right? We live in pornographic minds. It's like, when we think intimacy, we almost think it's synonymous with sex. And that's, nobody's fault. It's just what's been taught. And, we haven't done this necessary work. We don't have these conversations regularly enough. So I love all that. So we talked healing, trauma, entrepreneurs, relationship, guts, authenticity, the formula there from head to heart. Like, I'm trying to think of, like, is there anything We haven't yet.
I mean, I guess we could talk about a little bit of like personal leadership and performance, because that's something that, everybody asks me. They're always like, Annie, what do you see? What can be made better in people's leadership skills and their styles? And I could talk you through a couple of things if you want that I've.
Yeah, well, I think personal leadership, right? Because I think sometimes when the leadership topic comes up, like I won't title this leadership because it's going to exclude so many people that, like, if they don't hold a specific title, it's like they're not a leader. It's like, no, you're leading yourself every single day. So yeah, let's dive into, the misconception around leadership, the role that it plays in everybody's lives, and then some of the other things that you've been finding.
Well, so many people think that you have to, you can lead in business, but you're not leading in your personal life. And again, that's just not accurate. You're leading everywhere. And so one of the things I found about personal leadership to be true is that most of us assume when we are leading other people that we're leading them the way we want to be led instead of leading them the way they want to be led. And so it's a big disconnect with entrepreneurs that, well, I'm leading my team and I'm giving them a lot of freedom and, control and all these things. Whereas you can't lead to what they want. You have to lead to the functional level of what they're creating and how well they're getting to their results. And for a lot of the entrepreneurs I've worked with, they also tell me, they're like, Annie, it's just common sense. I don't understand why people aren't doing it. It's just common sense. And I'm like, it is common sense only to you. Unless you have written out a document that explains all the levels of your common sense as an expert entrepreneur in your specific industry, nobody else will ever do it the way you do it. So there's got to be this training of taking what you feel is common sense as an entrepreneur and training your team. It doesn't matter if you pay someone 150 grand to do a job with you. They still have to be developed into your way of thinking and the common sense that you know to be true. So I just had to say that because everyone asked me those two questions and they want that information. So,
are you familiar with Adlerian or Adlerian psychology? I think it's Adlerian psychology. I just started reading this book, The Courage to Be Disliked. I'm in the first 40 pages of it. And right at the beginning, they're sharing this example of perception, of how we see the world, of exactly what you're saying, right? It's common sense to me because that's my worldview. That's my perception. So it's my common sense. It's not going to be Andy's common sense. And they talk about a well, like well water stays at the same temperature year round. It's 60 degrees year round, no matter if it's hot outside or if it's cold outside. Now, if it's hot outside, you drink 60-degree water, it's going to be cooling to you. So your texture of how you see it, right? Your perception of how you see it dictates what it is you actually see. I see cold water that's going to be refreshing. Now, if it's cold, 60 degrees is going to be hot. If it's 18 below, 60 degrees in the wells are going to be warm. So your context at which you're looking at something, your perception is going to dictate what it is you see. And that's where I think you're saying it's like the entrepreneur sees it as common sense because it's his worldview, it's his perception, it's his context that he sees it, where other people aren't going to see it through that same exact lens. This book is like, it's blowing. I'm like 40 pages into it. It's like, I'm ready to like finish this conversation, jump back downstairs and finish it up. But yeah, The Courage to Be Disliked. Adlerian psychology.
No, I haven't heard of it, but I do agree with The Courage to Be Disliked. That's the only way, if you can be polarizing, that's the only way you find your tribe.
Yeah, amazing. Annie, this has been incredible, as it always is. Guys, this is the third time Annie's been on the show. I know I mentioned it in the intro, episode 136 of Trauma is a Story We Tell Ourselves, link down there below. We go deeper into the impact on relationships and understanding trauma in episode 165. Both of those will be linked down there in the show notes. But for the new audience out there, I know you got some new things going on, some courses and some coaching. Tell everybody where they connect with you, where you're hanging out, and where to socially find you.
You can just find me at northstarleadership.annie on Instagram. That's like the easiest way. DM me, send me your questions, ask anything you want. I'm happy to help.
Amazing. Guys, we'll have all of Annie's info linked down there below. It's been a couple of years, so I'm going to ask you the question again because I'm just curious, maybe your answer will change. We do end every episode here with the same and final question. The title of the show is called The Superhuman Life. I'm not going to tee it up. I'm just going to ask you, Annie, as we close out today's conversation. Once again, thank you for coming back on. How would you define living a superhuman life?
Oh gosh, I would define living a superhuman life as living in your heart every single day with how you integrate and interact with everyone around you, pouring love into people all day long, pouring love back into yourself. The book, The Power, really dialed it in for me. And that's how I live every day.
I love it. Guys, hope you got value out of this one. Connect with Annie. Check out her courses, her work, North Star Leadership, and Activate Your Genius. We got those linked down there in the show notes. Check out the first 2 episodes there as well. But share it, rate, review this one, do all that good stuff. We know we need you guys this year to help continue to spread this message. But Annie, it's been an absolute honor. And we will not go 2 years before we do this one again.